Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today we're going on a deep dive into the world of teaching English to beginners.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
It is. And we're using this Spanish language teacher training manual as our guide.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So,
I'm excited.
yeah, me too. And what's really interesting about this manual is that it goes like way beyond the typical, grammar rules and vocab lists.
Yeah.
Instead, it like emphasizes building this communicative foundation, starting with like simple phrases
Got it.
and gradually working up to like more and more complex interactions.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and I think that's like a key insight.
I think so too.
And it connects to why this approach is so effective for like the A1, A2 level learners.
Yeah, for sure. At that stage, it's less about like grammatical perfection
Right.
and more about just building that confidence and a sense of fluency.
Yeah, from the very beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's like giving learners the tools to actually like use the language even if it's not perfect, rather than getting bogged down in all the technicality.
I like that.
I like that too. This manual also seems to be really big on this idea of critical thinking when it comes to teaching.
It is. It is.
What's that all about?
So the manual like really emphasizes that teaching isn't just about following a script.
Right.
It's about constantly observing how your students are interacting.
Okay.
Analyzing what's working and what isn't, and being willing to adapt your methods to fit the needs of each class.
So it's almost like being a scientist in the classroom,
Yeah.
constantly experimenting and refining your approach.
I love that. That's a great way to put it.
Thanks.
It's about empowering you, the listener, to become a more responsive and intuitive teacher.
Okay.
Someone who can really tune into their students' needs and tailor their teaching accordingly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
One thing that really caught my eye in this manual was how much emphasis it puts on student motivation.
Yes.
Which, I mean, we all know how much easier it is to learn something when you're excited about it.
Absolutely. And the manual dives right into that, Acknowledging that motivation isn't like this fixed thing.
Right.
It can ebb and flow.
Yeah.
But what's cool is how it suggests tapping into what we call intrinsic motivation.
Oh, okay.
That internal drive that comes from finding something personally rewarding.
So how do they suggest we do that?
Well, they encourage teachers to connect lessons to students' personal goals and interests. For example, instead of just saying, learn this because it's on the test,
Right.
you could say, learn this because it'll help you connect with people from around the world, or learn this because it'll help you on your trip to London next summer.
I love that.
Yeah.
It makes the learning process so much more relevant and engaging.
Exactly. And it helps students see the value in what they're learning,
Yeah.
which in turn fuels their desire to learn more.
Right.
It also encourages a growth mindset where students see challenges as opportunities to learn and improve.
Instead of obstacles.
Exactly.
I'm already feeling inspired to rethink how I approach motivation in my own teaching. This manual is also packed with practical activities. It's
It is.
organized around the flow of a lesson.
Yes.
I love how it starts with warm-up activities to get everyone energized and focused.
And some of these warm-ups are quite unique.
Yeah.
Like the instant concentration technique. It's this breathing and mindfulness exercise.
Hold on, there's an exercise for teachers to concentrate.
Yes.
Okay, I am intrigued, but it makes sense. A teacher's state of mind can absolutely impact the whole classroom dynamic.
Absolutely. It underscores that teaching is a two-way street. The teacher's energy and focus directly influence the student's learning experience.
So tell me more about these warm-ups. There are a few that involve like a lot of movement, right?
Yes, there are some great examples of what we call total physical response, or TPR.
Okay.
Animal walks uses movement to teach animal vocabulary. And then there's stretch and wriggle, turns simple commands into a fun physical warm-up.
So it's not just about sitting at desks and repeating words. It's about getting the kids up and moving, using their bodies to learn. I can imagine how much more engaging that is.
You're right, engagement is key, and that's where the transitioners come in.
Transitioners, that's a new one for me.
They're designed to seamlessly bridge the gaps between different activities.
Okay.
And prevent those dreaded energy dips that can happen in a classroom.
What are some examples?
Well, there's What's Missing, which tests visual memory and descriptive language skills.
Okay.
And then there's quick-fire questions, rapid-fire review of previously learned material.
Gotcha. So it's all about maintaining that flow and preventing those moments where kids start to get restless or loose focus.
Precisely. And then to round out the lesson, we have the wrap-up activities.
Okay.
These are all about consolidating learning and ending the session on a positive note.
Of course, there's the classic show and tell,
Of course.
which always seems to be a hit,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing this manual has some more unique suggestions as well.
Definitely there's the magic microphone where students get to share their favorite moments or insights from the lesson. And then there are even a rhythmic clapping games to get everyone energized and end with a sense of fun and accomplishment.
I am loving the variety and creativity here.
Yeah.
It's clear that this manual is all about making learning enjoyable and engaging from start to finish. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another big theme that runs through this manual.
Okay.
Communication, after all. Isn't that the ultimate goal of language learning, to be able to communicate effectively?
Absolutely. And the manual dives deep into the communication process, emphasizing its importance in the classroom. But it's not just about talking at students.
No.
It's about creating a truly communicative environment
Okay.
where they feel empowered to use the language actively.
So it's about shifting from that traditional teacher-centered model to a more interactive, student-centered approach.
Exactly. And that can be a real game changer for A1, A2 learners.
Yeah.
When they feel comfortable using the language, even in simple ways, it boosts their confidence and motivates them to keep learning.
I'm curious to hear your expert perspective on this. What are some key strategies for fostering clear and effective communication in the classroom, especially when you're working with learners at different levels?
One of the most important things is to be mindful of the language you're using as a teacher.
Okay.
You want to avoid jargon or overly complex grammar that might go over students' heads. Remember, they're still building their foundation.
So it's about meeting students where they are linguistically speaking.
Exactly. And it's not just about the words you use, your body language and tone of voice also play a huge role.
Right, especially for beginners who might not catch every word you say.
Exactly.
I can imagine how much of a difference a warm smile and encouraging tone can make
Oh, for sure.
in helping a student feel comfortable and confident.
Absolutely. It's about creating a safe and supportive learning environment where
Right.
students feel comfortable taking risks and making mistakes.
Now, this manual goes even deeper into language. It explores the various functions of language, not just focusing on the grammar rules, but also looking at how we use language to inform, to express emotions, to make requests, and so on.
It's about moving beyond seeing language as just a set of rules to be memorized and instead understanding it as a tool for doing things in the world, a way to connect with others and express ourselves.
That's a really powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
And the manual brings this concept to life with concrete examples from the classroom. Imagine a student being able to express how a particular activity makes them feel.
Yes.
Even if it's just a few simple words, that's language in action.
Exactly. And it shows how powerful those early communicative experiences can be
Yeah.
for building fluency and confidence.
This manual is so insightful. So
Yeah.
you've talked about the importance of communication and the different ways we use language. But what about the actual teaching methods? What does this manual recommend?
It advocates for a variety of methods that are tailored to the A1, A2 levels, recognizing that different approaches resonate with different learners and learning styles.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. And we see a lot of emphasis on total physical response, which we talked about earlier with those warm-up activities.
Right, like the story about jumping jack exercising different parts of his body.
Yes, that's a perfect example.
It gets kids moving and learning vocabulary at the same time. It's a fantastic example of how TPR can make learning both fun and effective, especially for those A1, A2 learners who are just starting to grasp the basics.
Yeah.
This manual is truly a goldmine of practical ideas.
Okay.
I'm curious about one method. It mentions that some might consider a bit old school.
Okay.
Drilling.
Drilling can definitely get a bad rap,
Right.
especially if it's done poorly.
Right.
But this manual argues that drilling, when used strategically, can be incredibly valuable for building fluency and solidifying pronunciation, especially at the A1, A2 levels.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where drilling is challenging and engaging, not just mindless repetition.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm all for trying that. What other methods does the manual suggest?
Well, it's a big proponent of the communicative approach, which focuses on using language in real-life situations. Think role-playing scenarios like ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It takes language out of the textbook and puts it into contexts that are immediately relevant to learners.
Exactly, and it helps build confidence.
Yeah.
Because students can see how the language can be used in practical ways.
Right. It makes those abstract grammar rules suddenly feel much more tangible and meaningful.
Absolutely. And speaking of meaningful learning, the manual also touches on project-based learning as a fantastic approach, especially for promoting collaboration and problem-solving skills.
Can you give us an example of what a project might look like in this context? I'm trying to picture it with A1, A2 level learners.
So imagine you're teaching a unit on food. Students could work together to create a menu for an imaginary restaurant complete with descriptions of the dishes in English.
Oh, that's a great idea.
It's a fun and engaging way to apply vocabulary and grammar in a creative and collaborative setting.
I'm really impressed with the range of methods that this manual suggests. It's clearly not about sticking to just one approach, but rather building like a diverse toolkit to create this dynamic and effective learning experience.
Exactly. And all of these methods are grounded in a deep understanding of how learners at the A1, A2 levels best acquire language and build those crucial foundational skills.
This manual is truly a wealth of information. Is there anything else that stands out to you as particularly important for teachers working with beginners?
You know, I think there's one more concept I'd like to highlight, and that's scaffolding.
Okay.
It's all about providing learners with the right amount of support so they can succeed, and then gradually reducing that support as they gain confidence.
So it's like being a coach, not just an instructor.
Precisely. You're there to guide and support, but you're also encouraging learners to take risks and become more independent.
And the manual is full of specific examples of how to apply scaffolding to different activities and learning scenarios. That's so helpful. Yeah. I think a lot of teachers, myself included, can sometimes struggle with finding that balance between providing support and encouraging independence.
It's definitely a delicate balance.
Yeah.
But this manual does a great job of breaking down the concept of scaffolding and making it feel manageable and achievable.
I'm so glad we're taking this deep dive together.
Me too.
This manual is already giving me so much to think about and apply to my own teaching.
It's been a fascinating exploration so far.
Yeah, but this is just the beginning.
It is.
There's so much more to discover in this treasure trove of teaching wisdom. But for now, we'll take a little break.
Yeah, boy.
Be sure to join us for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll explore even more practical insights and strategies from this incredible teacher training manual.
I can't wait.
Me neither.
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll see you.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.
Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our deep dive into this awesome teacher training manual.
Yeah.
It's seriously full of practical tips and strategies for teaching English to beginners.
And you know, one thing that really impressed me about this manual is its attention to detail.
Okay.
It doesn't just like focus on the big picture of teaching methodology.
Right.
It also provides all these little nuggets of wisdom.
Ooh, I love those.
Yeah, that can make a huge difference in a learner's experience.
Like, I'm all about the nuggets.
Well, for example, it includes these handy phrase tables for greetings, goodbyes, expressing politeness.
Right.
Like saying please and thank you.
Yeah.
And common classroom instructions, all those little things that can smooth out those social interactions.
Yeah, especially for beginners.
Exactly.
I can see how that would be so helpful.
Yeah.
It's like giving learners a toolkit for navigating those basic social situations, which can be intimidating when you're just starting out.
Exactly. It shows that the manual isn't just about these abstract theories.
Right.
It's about empowering teachers to create a truly supportive and welcoming learning environment.
That's so important. Speaking of being prepared and supportive, we touched on lesson planning a bit earlier.
Yeah, we did.
What does this manual have to say about that?
It goes deep into lesson planning, offering a structured approach to help teachers feel confident and ready to deliver engaging lessons. You know, a lot of new teachers, I think, can feel really overwhelmed by the idea of lesson planning.
For sure.
It can seem like this huge, daunting task.
Oh, yeah. So many moving pieces to keep track of. How does this manual make it feel more manageable?
Well, it breaks the process down into clear, manageable steps.
Okay.
And it all starts with setting what we call SMART goals.
SMART goals. I think I've heard of that, but remind me what it stands for.
So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay.
It's about setting these clear, focused objectives
Got it.
that guide your planning and help you assess whether or not your students are meeting the learning targets.
So instead of just saying, I want my students to learn about animals,
Right.
you'd say something more specific like, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to name 5 different animals and describe their habitats in simple English sentences.
Exactly. It's about clarity and intentionality.
Right.
When your goals are SMART, your lesson planning naturally becomes more focused and effective.
Okay, SMART goals, check.
Yeah.
What else does this manual suggest we think about when planning a lesson?
Organization is key.
Okay.
The manual emphasizes organizing your materials, ensuring you have everything you need on hand and that it's all logically arranged.
Right.
You don't want to be like scrambling for handouts or fumbling with technology in the middle of a lesson.
Oh, tell me about it. I've definitely been there, and it's not a good look.
It's not a good look.
It can really throw off the flow of the lesson.
It can, right? The little bit of preparation goes a long way in creating a smooth and stress-free learning experience, both for the teacher and the students.
So, okay, so we've got our goals, we've got our materials all organized.
Yeah.
What about the actual teaching methods? How do we decide what to use?
So this is where your creativity and knowledge of your students comes in.
Okay.
The manual encourages you to think critically about which methods will be most effective for your specific learners. And for the content you're teaching, remember all those approaches we discussed earlier: TPR drilling, communicative activities, project-based learning.
Yeah.
It's about choosing the right tools for the job.
It's like having this amazing toolbox full of the different strategies, and you get to pick and choose the ones that'll work best in each situation.
Exactly. And a good lesson plan will often incorporate a variety of techniques to keep things engaging and to cater to different learning styles.
Makes sense. It's about finding that balance between structure and flexibility.
Yes. And of course, no lesson plan is complete without considering assessment.
Right, assessment. How are you going to know if your students are actually learning?
That's the question, and this manual emphasizes ongoing assessment throughout the lesson.
Okay.
Not just a final test or quiz at the end.
Got it.
It's about constantly checking for understanding
Yeah.
and adjusting your approach as needed.
So it's not just about assigning a grade, it's about using assessment as a tool to inform your teaching and ensure that everyone is on track.
Exactly, and the manual highlights all these creative ways there are to assess learning informally.
Like what?
Think like quick games, open-ended questions, or even having students demonstrate their understanding through actions or role plays.
Oh, those are great ideas. I think sometimes we as teachers can get stuck in that rut of relying on those traditional tests and quizzes.
We do this. Manual challenges us to think outside the box and find ways to make assessment engaging and meaningful for our learners.
Okay, so we've talked about setting SMART goals, organizing materials, choosing appropriate methods, and incorporating ongoing assessment. Anything else we need to keep in mind when lesson planning?
You know, one crucial aspect, and one that often trips up new teachers, is time management.
Time management.
Yes, the manual emphasizes allocating enough time for each activity
Right.
and ensuring that the overall flow of the lesson is smooth and well-paced.
Time management is definitely a skill that takes practice. I know I've learned the hard way that things often take longer than expected, especially when you're working with young learners.
It's so true. The manual offers some helpful tips for estimating how long activities will take.
Okay.
And for building in a little buffer time.
Oh, buffer time.
Yes, in case things run long or you need to revisit a concept.
That's a brilliant idea. I'm definitely going to start building in buffer time from now on. I can't tell you how many times I've had to rush through the last part of a lesson because something took longer than planned.
It happens to the best of us, but with a bit of careful planning and a few time management tricks up your sleeve, you can avoid those classroom chaos moments.
I'm starting to see how this lesson planning framework can really help teachers feel more confident and prepared.
Exactly. It's all about equipping you with the tools and strategies you need to create a successful learning experience for your students. And when you feel confident and prepared, that positive energy translates into a more engaging and effective learning environment.
I love that. It's a ripple effect of positive energy.
It is.
Speaking of positive energy, this manual is brimming with it.
It is.
It's so clear that the author is passionate about teaching English and that energy is contagious.
I agree. It's written in such a clear, approachable style, too.
Yeah.
It doesn't get bogged down in jargon or overly academic language.
This feels very practical and down to earth.
Yes.
Which I think is so important for a teacher training manual.
Absolutely.
It needs to be accessible to teachers of all experience levels.
For sure.
And it's full of those little aha moments,
Yes.
those nuggets of wisdom that make you think, wow, I never thought of it that way before.
That's the best feeling.
It's like having a conversation with an experienced and supportive mentor.
Yes.
Who's guiding you along the way so far in this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We've talked about the importance of communication, the different functions of language, a variety of teaching methods, and we've even delved into the nitty-gritty of lesson planning.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, and yet we've only just scratched the surface of what this manual has to offer.
There's still so much more to explore.
There is, and we want you, our listener, to be a part of that exploration.
Yes, pick up a copy of this manual.
Yeah.
Dive into those practical tips and activities and see how you can apply these ideas in your own classroom or learning environment.
And remember, you don't have to be a fluent English speaker to be an amazing teacher.
So true.
It's all about bringing your own enthusiasm, creativity, and a genuine desire to help your students learn and grow.
Well said. Now let's shift gears a bit and look at some of the more specific advice this manual offers. I'm thinking we should start with one of the most fundamental aspects of teaching any language: pronunciation.
Okay, pronunciation. That's
Yeah.
a great place to focus.
Yep.
It can be a real challenge for learners, especially at the beginner level. I know I've definitely encountered my fair share of pronunciation struggles over the years.
It's something that all language learners grapple with at some point.
For sure.
But what I appreciate about this manual is that it dedicates an entire section to pronunciation,
Oh, cool.
providing specific techniques and activities to help teachers address it effectively.
I'm curious to hear what they suggest. How does the manual recommend approaching pronunciation in a way that's both clear and engaging for learners? After all, no one wants to sit through a dry lecture on phonetics.
You're right, engagement is key. One of the key principles in this manual is to break down pronunciation into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So instead of overwhelming students with all the complexities of English sounds all at once,
Right?
you're focusing on specific sounds or patterns.
Exactly. And the manual provides guidance on how to identify those key sounds and patterns that are most important for beginners to master. It's all about prioritizing and building a solid foundation step by step.
That makes so much sense. It's like building a house. You need to start with a strong foundation before you can add the walls and the roof.
That's a great analogy, and the manual emphasizes that it's not just about explaining how sounds are made, it's about making those sounds come alive for learners.
Okay, so how do you make sounds come alive?
Well, visual aids are a fantastic tool. Think diagrams of the mouth videos of native speakers, even using real-life objects or actions to demonstrate how sounds are produced.
Oh, I love the idea of using real-life objects that would make it so much more concrete and engaging for learners. Can you give us an example?
Sure, imagine you're teaching the th sound, which can be tricky for many learners.
Yeah.
You could use a feather to demonstrate how air flows between the tongue and teeth when making that sound.
That's a brilliant idea. Or what about having students practice the P sound by pretending to blow out candles on a birthday cake?
Exactly. It's about finding those fun, creative ways to make pronunciation more tangible and relatable. And this manual is full of ideas like that. It even suggests drawing on learners' native language to help them understand English pronunciation.
Yes, that's the translanguaging approach we were talking about earlier.
Right, and it can be a really effective strategy for helping learners connect the dots between the sounds of their native language and the sounds of English.
I can see how that would be especially helpful for identifying sounds that might be similar or different between the two languages. It's about using what learners already know as a springboard to learning something new. So we've got this focus on breaking pronunciation down into smaller chunks, using visual aids, incorporating real-life examples, and even drawing on learners' native language. Anything else this manual suggests for teaching pronunciation effectively?
Well, it emphasizes drilling, which, as we discussed earlier, can be a valuable tool when used strategically.
Right, that's the one where you repeat words and phrases over and over. I'm curious how this manual recommends incorporating drilling without making it feel tedious or repetitive.
It's all about finding ways to make drilling engaging and interactive.
Okay.
The manual suggests techniques like choral repetition, where the whole class repeats together, individual repetition, where students take turns practicing, and even incorporating games and friendly competitions into the mix.
So it's about finding ways to make drilling fun and challenging, not just mindless repetition.
Exactly, and it's important to remember that drilling is just one tool in the pronunciation toolbox.
Right.
It should be combined with other methods like those we've already discussed.
This manual really takes a holistic approach to teaching pronunciation.
It does.
It's not just about focusing on individual sounds, it's about creating a learning environment where learners feel comfortable experimenting, making mistakes, and gradually refining their pronunciation over time.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important concept highlighted in the manual, the role of feedback.
Feedback? You mean like correcting students when they made pronunciation errors?
Yes, but it's about much more than just saying right or wrong. This manual emphasizes the importance of providing constructive, encouraging feedback that helps learners understand what they're doing well and where they need to improve.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between being accurate and being encouraging. I imagine that can be tricky sometimes, especially when you're dealing with learners who might be sensitive to correction.
It definitely takes practice, and it's important to remember that everyone learns at their own pace. This manual encourages us as teachers to be patient and to celebrate those small wins along the way.
I love that it's all about that journey of progress, not just the destination.
Yes, and remember, pronunciation is just one piece of the language learning puzzle.
Right.
It's important to address it effectively, but it's also important to keep it in perspective.
That's a great point. It's all about finding that balance between focusing on specific skills and creating a holistic learning experience.
Exactly, and this manual does a wonderful job of guiding teachers towards that balance.
I'm so glad we took this deep dive into this teacher training manual.
Me too.
It's given us so many practical insights and strategies for teaching English to beginners.
It's been a fascinating exploration.
Absolutely, but this is just the beginning.
It is.
We've still got so much more to explore in this treasure trove of teaching wisdom.
We do stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll delve into one of the manual's most intriguing and timely topics, the power of translanguaging.
All right, everyone, welcome back to our deep dive into this incredible teacher training manual. We've covered so much ground already, from lesson planning to pronunciation, but now, as promised, we're going to explore one of the most intriguing themes running through this manual, the power of translanguaging.
Yes, it's a concept that's generating a lot of buzz in the language teaching world these days, and this manual, it doesn't shy away from it.
Yeah.
In fact, it presents a really compelling argument for why translanguaging can be such a valuable tool.
Okay.
Especially when you're working with beginners.
I'll admit, I've heard mixed opinions about translanguaging.
Yeah.
Some teachers are all for it, while others, believe in creating a strictly English-only environment in the classroom.
Right.
Where does this manual stand on that debate?
Well, it leans towards embracing translanguaging.
Okay.
But in a very strategic and thoughtful way.
Gotcha.
The manual starts by acknowledging a simple truth.
Okay.
Learners don't just switch off their native language the moment they step into an English classroom. That makes so much sense. Language is such a fundamental part of who we are.
It is.
It's always there in the background, even if we're trying to focus on another language.
Exactly. And rather than seeing the native language as like a competitor to English,
Right.
the manual encourages teachers to see it as a valuable resource,
Okay.
a bridge to deeper understanding.
So it's not about English versus the native language. It's about finding ways to make them work together. I like that. But how does that actually play out in the classroom? What are some concrete examples of how translanguaging can be used effectively?
Well, one of the most common and perhaps most intuitive ways is to use the native language to clarify instructions
Okay.
or explain complex concepts.
Yeah.
Imagine you're introducing a new grammar rule that might be tricky for beginners to grasp.
Right.
Briefly explaining it in their native language can ensure that everyone's on the same page
Yeah.
before diving into the English explanation.
It's such a practical application. It's about making sure no one feels lost or left behind, especially in those early stages of learning. Precisely, and you can use translanguaging to check for understanding too.
Okay.
You might ask a question in English, then have students discuss their answers in their native language
Okay.
before sharing them with the class in English.
That's a clever strategy. It allows learners to process the information in a way that feels comfortable and familiar, and it gives them a chance to practice using English in a more scaffolded environment.
Right. And speaking of scaffolding, remember how we talked about how important that is for beginners?
Yes.
Well, translanguaging can be a fantastic scaffolding tool.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. How so?
Well, think about vocabulary building, for example.
Okay.
You can use what we call cognates.
Cognates?
Words that are similar in both languages.
Right.
To help learners expand their vocabulary quickly and efficiently.
So if you're teaching the word information in English,
Yeah.
you might point out that it's very similar to the Spanish word information.
Exactly. It helps learners see the connections between the languages, which can make learning feel less daunting.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's about leveraging those linguistic connections to make the learning process feel more intuitive and less like rote memorization.
Exactly.
I'm really starting to see the appeal of translanguaging, but I imagine it takes some finesse to use it effectively.
It does.
There's probably a fine line between using it as a support and letting it become a crutch.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about randomly switching between languages.
Right.
The manual stresses the importance of being intentional and thoughtful about when and how to incorporate translanguaging.
So it's about making conscious choices based on the specific needs of your learners and the objectives of the lesson.
Exactly, and the manual offers some really helpful tips for striking that balance, along with practical strategies for weaving translanguaging into different types of classroom activities.
I'm so impressed with how this manual tackles a topic as complex as translanguaging in such a clear and practical way. It's clearly based on a deep understanding of both research and real-world classroom experience.
It definitely feels like a very grounded and balanced approach, which is refreshing.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
I'm feeling inspired to revisit my own teaching practices and see how I can incorporate some of these ideas, especially this whole concept of translanguaging.
Yeah, me too. It's a good reminder that language teaching is a constantly evolving field.
Yeah.
And we as teachers need to be willing to stay curious, explore new approaches, and never stop learning.
Couldn't agree more. And this manual has been such a fantastic guide on that journey of exploration. It's packed with so much wisdom, practical advice, and creative activities. It's a must-read for anyone who's passionate about teaching English to beginners.
I agree 100%. We encourage you, our listener, to seek it out, dive into those pages, and let your own teaching journey be inspired by the insights and strategies that you discover.
And remember, whether you're a seasoned teacher or just starting out, the most important thing is to bring your passion, your creativity, and a genuine desire to help your students learn and grow.
Beautifully said. Keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep sharing the gift of language with the world.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into this incredible teacher training manual. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and that you're feeling as energized and inspired as we are. Until next time, happy teaching.